we are really excited about our Black History Month Lunch and Learn. We're collaborating with my office here at the clerk's office, and we're excited about what we're going to learn from each and every one of our panelists. Those of you who shared with us before, you know, we heard from Dr. Lance Williams on February 4th. He's the Assistant Director of the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, Northeastern Illinois University. And we were just enthralled with his presentation. Those of you who would be interested in seeing that, you can go to our webpage and you can find that. Let's see. I think Armanda will let you know at the somewhere down the road during this presentation where you can find that presentation for anybody who did not get an opportunity to see it. Today, of course, we're going to hear from State Senator Kimberly Lyford, and we're excited to hear from her. Next, coming up on February 18th, we're going to hear from Alexandria Sims. She's a political consultant. She's the president of APS Public Affairs and one of the co-founders of the Black Bench. It's a Chicago-based training program for future leaders. She'll discuss developing Black leadership for the 21st century. And we're going to ask that you all tune in next month because we're really excited for next month. We're going to kick off on Thursday, the very first Thursday in March. Of course, you know that's Women's History Month. Woo-hoo. And we're going to hear from Senator and Ambassador Carol Mosley Braun. I'm really excited to hear her presentation. As you all may know, she is the first African-American senator, Black senator in the U.S. Senate. Carol also served in the House of Representatives in Illinois. She was an assistant majority leader, and she paved the way for people like myself. So I'm not going to tell you about the others, but we have some exciting speakers that we're looking forward to hearing from for next month. But in the meantime, in between time, we've got this month, and I want to say that I'm excited to hear from Kimberly Lyford. She has been in the Senate for over 22 years, and she's going to share with us some legislation that the Black Caucus especially has focused in on. This year, it's on the governor's desk, and I'm going to ask everybody who tunes in with us to reach out to the governor and tell him that we need this legislation. We need to address some of the systemic issues that plague African-American communities, not just in the communities that we know about, the Chicagoland area, but across the state and across the country. Now, we can only do what we can do in the state of Illinois, and that's why it's important to hear from her today about what this is and how we can be helpful. So with that, President Lipka, I just wanted to tell people who we have coming up. At the end of the month, we're going to hear from Professor Stanford Lewis, and he's formerly of Rutgers University at Harvard University, Lemoyne-Owen College, and he's going to share about the life and times of Maywood's favorite son, Fred Hampton, and civil rights icon, Congressman John Lewis. So we've got these programs there packed full of information. You're going to be able to participate in that. You'll be able to ask questions of our panelists. So with that, Dr. Lipka, I want to put it back in your hands for some final thoughts before we hear from the senator.
Well, I'm just grateful to you, Clerk, for your work on bringing these outstanding speakers. We have a tradition of having wonderful speakers at our meetings, but you're taking it over the top. Certainly appreciate that. And I've estimated that we had well over 1,000 visitors to our meetings last year because I think of quality speakers that we had. We're off to an amazing start this year. This is for those of you that may not know, in most Rotary clubs, the responsibility of the president-elect to attract speakers. and to plan the program for our meetings. And others will assist Karen as she goes forward, but boy, she has really hit it out of the ballpark here. And we're so grateful, too, to have Kim Lightford here today and the other great speakers you've scheduled. This is a wonderful club doing amazing work around the world, and their speakers actually have come in from other countries around the world, like Nepal and Korea and China and throughout Europe, as well as our visitors from other countries. And we're grateful to you, Karen, again, as I said, for our lineup coming forward in the next 2 months and other months to follow. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Well, I want to see if the senator has joined us yet. No one. This is a little different for me, using a webinar versus just straight Zoom, so I can't really see anything here. So, Mr. President, could you discuss how a person could actually join Rotary?
Sure, be happy to. We have an onboarding process that's very specific, and we hope is very inclusive. The first thing one might do when they're interested in joining our club is contacting our chair of our membership committee, one of 13 committees that help to plan programs and move our organization forward through the 21st century. And that's Jamaica Davis, and her email is jamaica.mdavis@gmail.com. You can also, again, express interest, as you've been told before by Takesha and Armanda, on our websites and Facebook pages. You can see the addresses in the background here. So once the membership chair receives an inquiry, then they take charge to follow up and to invite that individual to attend meetings of the club so that we have truth in packaging, so you can share the excitement of this organization moving forward. And then also, after several meetings of attendance, you'll be invited to consider making a formal application to the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors will consider that application, and then providing their approval is achieved, and then you'll have 7 days of review by the rest of the members where we entertain the possibility of objections that someone may have. But then, you know, people by and large, we want folks to join our club, and we want to continue growing so we can have an even greater impact on the world. Following that 7-day review period, then members pay their first quarter of dues, and they're welcomed in through an induction and their first classification speech to the club to introduce themselves to us. That's really the whole 9 yards. And it's all laid out, too, on a web link that I could share with anyone that would ask for it through, again, these contact points that are shown for you in the background. Trying to think, that covers it pretty well as far as membership, I think. One of the things we're doing a number of different, are you back? We're back, I guess. So thank you all again for being here. Karen?
I don't hear anything.
Karen's muted. There you go.
Hi, Senator.
Hi, how are you, Clerk Yarbrough?
Well, let me give you a formal introduction while you're getting ready.
Okay.
The Honorable Kimberly A. Lightford is an Illinois State Senator. She is the Senate Majority Leader, and her district is Senate District number 4. She is the first Black woman to serve as the Illinois Senate Majority Leader. She has dedicated her 22 years legislative career to championing her passion of education and youth development. As a former chair of the Senate Education Committee, she has passed notable education reform legislation that is recognized as a national model. This legislation led to the establishment of stronger methods of evaluating teachers and tracking student progress. She also started the state's universal preschool program. She established no bullying zones on school playgrounds and reform disciplinary practices that were disproportionately affecting at-risk children. Leader Lightford is also committed to improving the quality of life for working class families. She was the lead sponsor of the Illinois Equal Pay Act, and she fought to reform the payday loan industry. She's responsible for raising the minimum wage in Illinois 3 times, including a 2019 measure that gradually increases it to $15 an hour. While serving as the chair of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, she's led a 4-pillar agenda aimed at dismantling systemic racism in education, criminal justice, healthcare, human services, and the economy. A lifelong resident of her district, she was born in Chicago, raised in Maywood. She holds a bachelor's degree in public communications from Western Illinois University and a master's of public administration degree from the University of Illinois at Springfield. She's received numerous awards for her leadership and advocacy and is a member of many organizations, including Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the Chicago Women's Network. So, without further ado, this time with us today, it's very important, the work that you're doing, and I'm glad that you're just sharing a little bit of your time with us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Yarbrough, and thank you for having me on. I'm out of town, and so I'm not in my usual setup, so I was being technology challenged, so forgive me for that. But I can't thank you enough for inviting me on. I know that with your expertise and all the great work that you're doing, that you also recognize what goes on in Springfield, having been a part of that process as well. And I know the challenge that we all have been facing during this COVID crisis. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for indulging with me as I share with you this afternoon the Black Caucus's agenda to rid Illinois of systemic racism. And this primarily was brewed after the we'd gone down. I'm going to just give you a nutshell and then try to grab as much information as I can share with you in my 20-minute time frame here. And so when the George Ford incident happened back in May of 2020, the legislature, we were in our stay at home. I think the whole state was shut down at that time, but we found ourselves back in Springfield that the week that the incident happened so that we can pass a balanced budget. And so right after we'd done that, George Floyd happened, we came home, and there was a cry out from not only the Black community, but a cry from all people across this country on racial justice and social justice, and the support for the Black Lives Matter movement that had been around for many years had just really began to grow and blossom into a place of protest. And so the Joint Caucus is a consortium of Black elected officials from the federal, state, local, and county levels of government in Illinois. We convened what we called our Days of Action. And we began to go from the west side of Chicago to the south side, west suburbs. We were right here in Maywood, and to the south suburbs to share as legislators our concern for what was going on. But what we didn't do, in my opinion, after that was act as legislators and address the policy. At that point, I couldn't sleep. I knew that there was more that had to be done, and the process of how to get us to that place is what began to plague me. I host this Juneteenth celebration. We had a parade where we connected Broadview to Bellwood to Maywood to Forest Park, and we went through all of the communities to get us there, and the support was just beautiful. I supported parades in Oak Park and through the Austin community, and it just showed me throughout Proviso and the Austin community that there was this togetherness of all people like I'd never seen it before. And so as the chairman of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus at that time, I went back to them and saying, hey, we have to do something to directly affect policy. These are challenges that are embedded in our very government system. And so my colleagues and I spent the last 7 out of the 12 months of last year making sure that we address these issues. So we had over a dozen public hearings, over hundreds of hours developing this bold, transformative agenda to address the deep roots of systemic racism and their lasting impact on Illinoisans. We recognized that our country was in the midst of an unprecedented moment in time that presented an enormous opportunity to address the systemic racism and oppression that Black Americans have faced for generations. So we knew we had to leverage this moment to undo the damaging policies and procedures that have been built into our state system of government that created these deep inequities and opportunity gaps in education, in healthcare and human services, in economic development, and in our criminal justice system. So the caucus created an agenda to address these inequities head on, so that our children and their children can break this vicious cycle that has held so many back from reaching our full potential. And personally, for me, I led this work as a 21-year member senator on the Senate Education Committee, seeing these same disparities year after year. And as a Black mother, and for all the other Black mothers who, like me, have far too often feared for our children's lives and safety simply because our kids are Black. And we can no longer accept this as the norm for our community. So as a caucus, we identified 4 pillars of public policy that we address in a collaborative and a transparent way by soliciting input and feedback from subject matter experts from across the country. They all came and presented at the more than 3 dozens of public hearings that we had just for criminal justice reform alone. Then we also had many for education, for economic access, for healthcare. And we put in over 100 hours of testimony to make sure that our proposal would be well informed. And this work could not have been done without the hundreds of hours that we put in. But not only caucus members and these researchers, but our staff invested a lot in this work, in addition to advocacy groups, subject matter experts, and then experts who we thought would be in opposition of what we were doing, but we wanted to learn from them and from their perspectives at the same time. So we made sure that we had those resources that would help us shape the proposals that will have an impact on communities for generations to come. And those 4 pillars basically is criminal justice reform, violence reduction, and police accountability is pillar 1. Pillar 2 is education and workforce development. Pillar 3 was economic access, equity, and opportunity. And the 4th and final pillar was healthcare and human services. So during veto session was canceled. And so we continued to work so that we had more time to just continue negotiating. So the Senate had passed legislation that allowed us to convene virtually. The House had not. So what we had to do was invite our House colleagues to attend our virtual meetings as guests. And we made sure that both the Senate Republicans as well as Democrats, House Republicans as well as Democrats, and then each committee that convened around these particular subject matters. So at any given moment, there will be 60, 70 legislators and staff in a subject matter hearing with experts and advocates for weeks at a time. And so I think I was so happy that Karen said I could come on and be a part of your meeting, because one of the strategies I used in making sure that we could get this pushed through was always controlling our own narrative. the worst thing can happen is when the media get ahead of what we're working on, and then there's a lot of misinformation, and then it becomes difficult to negotiate what it is that our communities actually need and what the demand is actually requesting of us at this time. And so we had to work in a unified form. We had to be as confidential as we possibly could and not share our information with anyone. And we knew that, I knew, and it was difficult for me to get buy-in on this for a little bit, but they finally got it, that we had to have an omnibus bill, that we could not have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 bills in this subject, another 15 or 20 in this subject, etc. We would never be able to make it through a short session. So we had to have one big omnibus bill that had been crafted and negotiated with input of our colleagues. Right now, law enforcement keeps presenting themselves to the public as if they did not participate, or as if they were rushed through the process, or we passed this in the middle of the night. It was in the wee hours of the night because we were convening and still negotiating and working on a number of initiatives. But throughout the process, law enforcement was a critical component of the negotiation. In fact, their lobbyists provided for us input. We adopted most of their input, and in the negotiation process, neither side actually walked away with everything that we wanted. So in the law enforcement space, we were able to modernize some of the sentencing laws. Our goal was to end cash bail. We were successful in doing so. Needed to institute certification and decertification, create a system that would be statewide for police officers. Every community is doing something very different. We required the use of body cameras, which is more of codifying the 2015 Criminal Justice Reform Act that we did when Senator Sims was the House member. Our Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, was the Senate sponsor. And so the Attorney General was very helpful in what we were working on now. We did continue to have the expertise of Senator Sims because he was a House member years ago. And then we also had Representative Justin Slaughter, who is the House chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And so with these guys being the co-chairs of this pillar, I knew we couldn't go wrong. We also looked to amplify law enforcement training standards to make sure, too, that they're getting enough training that includes bias, that includes cultural competency. We learned throughout this process that the state police officers receive double the amount of training that law enforcement and local communities are required to have. And we thought that that was very important. We also wanted to look at connecting substance abuse treatment programs with first responder duties. Wanted to increase and improve the de-escalation and support mental health training for law enforcement. We required police to develop a plan to protect children during search warrant raids. We wanted to address officer wellness because we want to make sure officers are just as well and safe in our communities when they're protecting us as well. And then we wanted to establish the statewide use of force standards by 2022. Some of the bills that the law does not require a defunding of the police. In fact, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus has never said that we wanted to defund the police. And so we just made sure that when we were looking to build out our criminal justice reform pillar, that we focused on police accountability, detainee, prisoner, and citizens' rights. We focused on military equipment. We also focused on some court reforms that were necessary, some law enforcement decertification, and that's how we came up with this incredible pillar for law enforcement. Our second pillar is education and workforce development. Myself and Representative Carol Ammons, we co-chaired that pillar. And what the goal was through the education pillar was to explore it through the lens of systemic racism, to identify the best ways to bring an end to the inequities in curriculums and in the practices that often do more to cause racial division than support the needs of our most vulnerable children and young adults. We also had a total of 8 public hearings, and what we did was we broke things out where we focused on early childhood education, we moved through K through 12, we looked to address issues in higher ed, and then we looked to address issues in workforce development. And so a little bit on each one quickly, because I've got so many pillars to move through. I did want to just share a little more detail of criminal justice reform, since that seems to be the catch-all right now. But in the education space, children as young as 3 and 4 year olds are showing up and they're not able to speak well, or they have issues with memory. They can't count their numbers, ABCs, etc. And so what's important is that we assess the kids coming in. So we're requiring an assessment so that we can see where these young children are when they arrive and then begin to provide for them the early intervention services that are necessary, which is another provision that we've added. That provision codifies what we know is needed, but no one was actually making sure actually happened. And especially in communities where there is concentrated poverty, where there's generational poverty, and where there has been a clear indicator based on the data that was shared to me by those who delivered the service that over 53% of kids that are in this concentrated poverty section for the past 8 years have not moved. So they're still at 53% of kids are not achieving at this space. So we look to see, well, what are the financial burdens? We found that there is a Medicaid diagnostic code that could be used to help circumvent some of the cost. And so we factored that in. And we factored in provisions where parents had to be notified so their kids can get the help that they need, tell them what those intervention services will be. We included some mental health services as well. And we wanted to make sure that it was payable through the Medicaid diagnostic code. So now that we have their kids prepared from early childhood, they arrive in K through 12, they're arriving to a situation again that is not balanced in terms of racial justice. And so when we look at kids who have these greater needs, the question becomes, is it in middle school? They're not prepared for high school. Where are the challenges? So we dove into a number of areas, but I want to really highlight for you the Inclusive History Commission that was created. Representative Ford had been working on this for a while with ISB. They did some drafting for us. What we're wanting to do is make sure that when we teach children history, that is inclusive of all people. And I do mean all people. And so we created a commission for the next year that will take deep dives into the curriculum and the practices and the actual publications of the books to the pictures that are shown. Black people have not been held at any high esteem. Kids learn and they're motivated when they're young and they're building the self-image and the self-confidence, but they're not able to see it in the school books and know that they come from inventions, from the inventors, from the creators and all of those things. So it's important that we make sure that they're not just talked about, learn slavery and taught about, post-slavery and et cetera. Another area we focus heavily on is restorative justice practices. We created a whole child commission, task force, if you will, to make sure that we do things like define trauma-informed schools. We're able to give those supports to the teachers as well as the students. We're able to make sure that we define ACE scores and the impact that they have in a trauma-informed environment. And how do we create this inclusive, safe environment for learning? So that's another area that we focused on that pretty much takes in all of K through 12 and actually preschool as well. Higher education, the challenges there we connected with the lack of leaving high school. And for example, I just inquired. I just wanted to know, well, what are the basic eligibility requirements to attend the University of Illinois? That's our flagship school in Champaign-Urbana. Why are there less than 10% of the student population, even more than that, are minority students? And then the Black population, it was just so diminished. I'm too embarrassed to tell you the percentage. And so I go, what is the issue there and why? I learned in that very moment that they required 2 years of laboratory science, they required 2 years of foreign language, and that they required some additional courses that our school districts and many school districts that are in low-income communities and Black communities, brown communities across the state were not offering. So even as a student and as a parent, you think your kid did well. They passed all of their courses. They're graduating with a GPA above a 3.0. Their ACT or their SAT score is exactly where it ought to be, but they're not getting accepted into the university. It's because they didn't have those basic computer literacy requirements, the laboratory requirements, and the foreign language requirements. So I made that adjustment. I'm going to hold myself accountable for that because it is necessary. All of our school districts should be required to have the best chances for our kids to be accepted into our flagship university. Not some kids, but all kids should have access. And so it was important that we adopted those standards that we did. And then we also wanted to make sure that when kids are going to a community college, we learned that the percentage of Black children in our state universities is, again, so alarmingly low that where we found them was in the community college. So right now we have 58% of Black kids attending college level are in our community college system. But we also learned that they are they're having to take so many prerequisites that they're on year 2 when they should be graduating, but they need another year, and in some cases a year and a half, because they spent their first year taking prerequisite classes just to be accepted into a community college, which means the high school didn't prepare them well enough. And so we focused in heavily with the Board of Higher Ed, the Community College Board, and the State Board of Ed to make sure that English and math requirements in high school will match up with the community college requirements so that when kids come, they're automatically accepted in community college. They're not having to use their MAP grant and their Pell Grant to pay for prerequisite courses to be accepted into the school, and then they have no credit hours. Then we found out as well that when they leave the community college level to attain the 4-year degree, that they're losing credit. So the connection between ICC missing. So we wanted to make sure that if you have a student and your student is leaving any community college, that their credits will be transferred. So if they think they have 60 hours and they're a junior, we don't want them to get to the 4-year university and have only 42 credit hours, and now they're a first semester or second semester sophomore. So we wanted to make sure that the linkage was actually properly done better between our high school to our community college level. And then finally, in the workforce development space, it's been really bad. It's been really bad. The percentage of young African-American men unemployed in Chicago is double the national unemployment rate, which is a travesty. And so when we look at that, where did we fail them? What happened that we have so many young men out of work and out of school? And so we have to make sure that in the vocational learning space and in spaces that would allow young people to develop skill sets and be able to move into a space. If they decide that they're not going to attain a higher education for whatever reason, we should give them something more that they need so that they can develop careers. And so we pushed really hard to look at our federal programs around workforce development. Most of our monies in the state is total federal dollars. The state's contribution is so minimal. And there's 5 focus areas that the federal government has submitted to us. And yet they're at 5 different agencies. They're all spread it around. They have no connectivity. There's no collaboration. And young people would just be running through a ring of red tape. Our legislation requires for them to create a one-stop shop, one agency that can develop and deliver a workforce development program that's connected to the high schools, and it starts at junior year. So we're really working to build out a better system for young people who choose not to go on and attain a higher education. We also, one last thing I'll bring up there is with our teacher shortage, recognize that there's a teacher shortage. We're doing everything that we can to make sure we turn that around. My focus was even more so on Black children and Black young adults who want to teach. When you leave Chicago and Cook County, I'll give you this percentage. Less than 3% of teachers across the entire state are Black. Less than 3%, which is unbelievable. I grew so much through. I had growing pains with these pillars, but it's really the life that I've had to live, and my ancestors we all had to live this. But it's just not acceptable. We have to change it, and so we're making sure that in our minority teach scholarship portion, that there's a set aside for Black male category, and we want to build that category up. And as we build that category up, we're going to also include bilingual teachers and begin to help address in some of those spaces where the teacher shortage is relevant. Moving on to the third pillar, the economic access pillar. I've got to tell you guys, it was so much in that pillar, which was also designed to address the root causes of unequal pay, wage discrimination, income gaps, lack of access to capital, racist lending practices that have just been impeding and impacted Black and Brown communities again for generations. So we prioritize increasing small business and entrepreneurship. We wanted to make sure that we were promoting environmental justice so that we too had clean air. We had lead-free water for Black communities. I know that's something that we've all worked on, but it hasn't been embedded in statute as it should. We also work to increase housing and employment access in all of our disproportionately impacted areas, especially for people who have these lived experiences. They come from formerly incarcerated or they've been homeless, and et cetera. Wanted to make sure we provide affordable housing in those spaces. And then we were really proud to address some other areas that dealt with the procurement process, to make sure that small Black business owners had access to state government spend. When I look at this $40.5 billion budget, it tells me that they're not focused on improving the lives and outcomes of all people, because there's no way that there could be $40 billion rolling out each year from the state and our communities remain with food deserts as we do, housing insecurities, and all of these other challenges that we face. So we primarily set up a commission. I monitored after the Illinois Department of Human Rights. It would be the Commission on Inclusion and Equity, and it would make sure that it housed the business enterprise program that CMS holds that never meets its minority goals, and to make sure that it takes in all of the other challenges that are part of the procurement process in state government. The Department of Human Rights is after you've been wrongly, whatever the wrongful thing that happened, and you go to the Department of Human Rights, that's after the fact. This will be an inclusion that is beforehand to make sure that if these large prime companies are not meeting their goals, they cannot come back and renew as they have done over the years and continually be renewed and not satisfy their goals. Continuously receive contracts and never do business with Black vendors. And so that has to change. And then finally, in our healthcare and human services pillar, here we were looking to address issues that like the maternal mortality rate of Black mothers. We know that has been just devastating. Over 2.5 women are more likely to die from complications associated with childbirth. And there has not been a single identifiable fix to help Black women in this space. And so this pillar was also designed to address the deficiencies in poor Black and brown communities that are statewide, and look at this through the lens of equity, investment, and the improvement of health outcomes. So what we did here was we prohibited hospital closures during the duration of public health emergencies, which would end in December of 2023. We established training and certification requirements for community health workers, as well as requiring Medicaid reimbursements for community health workers services. And we created a Medicaid Managed Care Oversight Commission that's under the Department of Healthcare and Family Services to evaluate programs with an emphasis on health outcomes and requiring HFS to recommend additional populations that require MCO care planning and consideration of the social detriments of health. So with the social detriments of health, I can close out the presentation and allow for question and answers. The social detriments of health is clearly the collaboration that shows you how all of our pillars intertwine and interface with one another. In order to be healthy, your parents need to be paid fairly, and wage equity is a problem. You're hungry, you're unhealthy, you're eating unhealthy foods in the community, housing isn't safe, there's more stress, more trauma, and we've got to figure out how to win back our communities and give us an opportunity to allow our children to reach their full potential. And not just children, young adults and even grown adults still have struggles with life challenges, and they need those extra supports. So I'd be happy to answer questions.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator. You covered these 4 pillars, I think, very, very well. And thank you so much for really diving into what you all were focused on. I'm going to take the questions from the chat, and I can't see who this is from, but it starts off with, I agree on the media with their own narrative. How can we unify our respective communities and improve our relations with each other in the surrounding communities?
Well, it starts at home. I believe that once we empower families, there's so much either single homes in our communities, or we find more grandparents raising grandchildren than ever before. More children parents are either on substance abuse or incarcerated. And so we have some heavy challenges that shows when kids arrive so young, they're not working in a collaborative manner with each other. They're on their little computers. They don't know how to resolve conflict, and it turns over into their adult life, and no one knows how to communicate with each other and get along anymore. So we're hoping that through our restorative justice practices, we're hoping through our ability for all of us to learn, not just during Black History Month, about how great we are and earn where we come from, but to help us learn from the time we enter a school setting of who we are and where we come from, just like all other races, so that we can begin to appreciate one another. All of our cultures are rich in history, and if we begin to embrace each other, share those mechanisms, I think the issue of black and white will eventually fade away. And that's my hope and my goal. Most of what we've done will not only help black communities, but it would definitely support brown communities. It would help all those who have been marginalized, the LGBTQ community, downstate rural Illinois, just other low-income and poor people. It's important that we do not leave them out.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see. Takesha Buford says, thank you for the work that you're doing. In addition to the lack of poor college preparatory curriculum in the high schools located in lower income communities, is there a plan to address the financial barrier for students who desire to attend a flagship university once they have the necessary requirements to apply to said school without acquiring a boatload of debt?
Yes, so Karen and the young lady who asked the question, we focus so hard on trying to get to a place of free tuition. That's our goal. That's what we're working towards. Right now what we're doing is trying to increase the MAP grant award to make sure that the monies are greater so that you can make it through the 4 years. We made sure that with all of our scholarship programs, we increased the line on those, but we have a fiscal crisis. We are in the midst of a $5 billion budget hole. We're looking to actually have cuts across the board. The governor's goal was to get that progressive tax passed. It would have generated about $3 billion. Without that, we're looking to create some corporate loophole tax, which doesn't touch a large number as $3 billion. But we're looking at decoupling, and we're looking at gasoline tax. We're looking at all these things of ways to generate revenue for the state so that we don't have more cuts. Trying to get us to a place of free tuition and additional resources for students is our challenge while we have these fiscal challenges. But we are on top of it. We're hugely working on it. We've connected with several other states who have adopted free tuition. So our Board of Higher Ed, ISAC, our Illinois Student Assistance Commission, who administers those grants, and ICCB, have created a commission where the three of them are working together over this to develop a 10-year plan that we've asked them to execute, looking at it through a racial lens on how do kids qualify and are able to attend our four-year universities and not only qualify, but be able to be financially stable to make it through the process without having to take on student debts. So one of the problems that we came across, and the reason why this commission is so important, because when you talk about free tuition, if you're a student that chooses to go to stay home and go to Triton College, or you're at the College of DuPage, or you're at Chicago State, or you're somewhere close by, or if you choose to go to Champaign-Urbana or SIU, all of their rates are different. And if you choose to use that scholarship and go out of state to a HBCU, those are all challenges that we're facing. How do we keep students in Illinois, give them resources that remains in our system, but the dollar amount be consistent across the board, because the per credit hour at each institution varies. So it's some things that we have to work out, and that's where we're asking our agencies to compile and work together and come up with how do we get to free tuition. So we are working on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Regarding minority teachers, we've heard a significant number are not passing the first time and they have to take it multiple times. Ms. Williams says that she thinks that this is culturally biased. Is there anything to be done about that?
There is, Karen. So I missed your first part. Was this the basic exam that she was speaking?
Well, she just says, I don't know, maybe okay. So, okay. But she didn't say, okay. But
well, let me speak to what we learned in our research and how we're looking at this. The basic exam has been a challenge for a very long time, and particularly for Black men and women to pass. They've gone through all their years in school, and then they can't pass this exam, and now they're no longer eligible to be a teacher. What we did was we were able to read the full test. There was a test that were required that a 3.0 was required. We removed that test. And then the basic core, there's a couple initiatives that are on the table to also remove the basic core. We're in a debate on what would be the replacement or whether or not a test is required. We were able to remove this 3.0 GPA requirement because there are no other fields of expertise that required a 3.0 or a standard of what the GPA had to be in order to move forward in that career. So we clearly were able to remove that 3.0 GPA requirement, but we're still trying to work on this whole scoring on an exam and how we get rid of it or what the replacement would be or something in that vein. So that is definitely something that we're working on.
Great. Mia Boncourt asked, she says, I appreciate your presentation. And now my question is, what's the plan to address the inequality in technological resources that impact the learning of Black students in low-income communities?
Yes, that brings tears to my eyes. It takes me back to when COVID first hit, and I was chairing a education committee for the state as it related to our children being connected. And I was so challenged when I don't know a nicer word to say, when I learned that 66% of children were connected. Now we're in like the month of June and we had all been sent home around March. So my concern was, so you're telling me that there was 34% of children across the state that were not connected for whatever reason. They didn't have access to a laptop, or they didn't have Wi-Fi connect at home, or whatever the situation. And then what did we do about it as a state? And so I challenged our state superintendent to come up with what would be the resolve. When the federal government sent us the CARES money that first time, clearly they did not send enough. The second disbursement began to help at some point where we were able to put additional monies in the connectivity, the digital divide space. The governor added additional $50 million to the federal government's number, and we were able to close that gap by 12%. So over that next month, we've gone from a 66% connectivity to 78%. I still felt that 22% was going to be in the Black and brown community, and I wanted to know where those kids were that were not connected. And after you have not, as a teacher, heard from your student 3 days in a row, what do? Is there a process? And so I triggered a process that if a teacher had not had their students sign on that third day, that it triggered a wellness check by their local law enforcement to go to that home to find out why that child was not connected. And so there are so many challenges that we face in trying to tap into all of them and resolve them became, of course, it's a heavy load, a big challenge. But in the education space, I just stayed all over it and began to pursue corporate The Illinois Legislative Black Caucus and our foundation was helpful. We raised money to make sure we got laptops out, and we worked through the school districts to identify those students and those families that needed help. And particularly in Proviso, I sent resources. I raised over $50,000 for the department on aging to go to grandparents who were raising grandchildren, because they were telling me, grandparents were calling my office saying, hey, I've got 4 kids here. They all have to be on in school at the same time, and we only have one computer. And so I need 3 more laptops. And so these were the challenges that our families were facing that we were trying to address. We're still in the midst of addressing them. We've asked the federal government to allow more flexibility on how those resources can be used when they send them to us. This next CARES package should be 3 times the amount that education has received in the previous care packages. So we're hoping that we can get to that digital divide and have more resources to be able to help us do so.
Okay. All right, we're going to be winding down here. Do you have some water there, Senator, or something? Because you're just rambling. But we so appreciate this time. This is so helpful for us to know. Now, it's my understanding the governor has not signed this legislation yet, and Roberto Sepulveda wants to know, how can we support this advocacy, not just at the state level, but with federal government as well? What can we do to help?
Thank you for that question, because the governor has not signed the bills because they've just arrived to him. There was a process of a 30-day hold from lame duck. For whatever reason, process paperwork still needed to be done. Each pillar had a number of articles that we touched on in statute. So now the governor does finally have all 4 pillars, 3 pillars on his desk. The healthcare pillar has to go back. We have to vote for that again because each chamber passed a slightly different version. So we have to re-up that for this spring session. But the 3 pillars that the governor does have, his team is reviewing the documents right now. He's assured us that he's in support of our pillars, and we're looking to set some dates for signing of the pillars. As far as what you can do to help is just to be as big of an advocate as the opponents are. So that's calling the governor's office, saying you support the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus agenda, that you support all 4 of our pillars, and that you're requesting that he sign them. Email the governor. I don't have his address, but it may be something like .ilga.gov. And forgive me for not knowing, but if you Google or log on to the Illinois governor's office or administration, I'm sure something will show there for you to be able to have access, just to encourage the governor and let him know that we have just as many people who are calling on this. Our communities have been asking for this for generations and wanted to know what's taking us so long. So there is no rush. We didn't rush things through. That it's been a long wait. And then as far as the federal government is concerned, I was so grateful to hear President Biden and Vice President Harris talk about systemic racism and are willing to begin to work in our space to rid it. I'm hoping that these packages go nationwide. Our goal is to connect with the National Black Caucus across all of the countries, across all of the states, to say, hey, take a look at what we were able to accomplish in Illinois and see what your state needs and then shape it to fit your communities in your state. So we're working on that. If the president and vice president could come ahead of us and say, hey, we need to do all of these things, that would be pretty amazing. But until they do so, we're doing what we consider some groundwork, boots on the ground with our colleagues in all of the other states.
Okay. Let's see. Thank you, Senator Lyford, for this informative event. Senator, how can those of us that live in areas that are not minority, major majority districts get involved to help pass future Black Caucus agenda items. I am also I'm trying to read this here. I'm also very, and I can't get it up here. Oh, here. I am also very interested in what can be done with the diversity in many of our school districts in the collar counties and suburban Cook. The teachers and administration are not reflective of the great diversity in many districts. We are seeing this as a pattern. It's not an isolated issue.
Yes, and they're right, Karen. You know, that goes to it speaks to the fact that I mentioned the teacher shortage. But not only is there a teacher shortage, there's a greater shortage of minority teachers and Black teachers. And once you leave Cook County, and they don't have your finger stamp, Cook County Clerk Yarbrough, the other clerks, they're not getting it in their counties, okay? And all of the other supports that are needed and outside of Cook County is not there. But what we do as a Black Caucus is we focus on Black people, brown people, minority, marginalized across the entire state. So we've developed relationships in the Quad Cities and in Cairo and downstate and, you know, the East St. Louis area where we're helping our colleagues. In Springfield, we just appointed the first Black state legislator, Doris Turner. And prior to Doris' arrival, we had began working with Senator Menard to make sure that the Blacks in Springfield and Decatur was getting support. So we had already began lending ourselves through our statewide urban league. We utilize our statewide NAACPs. We utilize all of our statewide Black group organizations to make sure that youth employment is effective for them. After school supports is available to them. And we've been reaching out over the last years when I was the chairman. And I'm certain that our current chairman will continue on with the same supports that we put together. So I would think that encouraging at the high school level more Black students to be interested in the field of teaching. We have to do that too, because even right now, the percentage of students enrolled in our universities who are enrolled for a teacher profession, it was like less than 4%. So we're not producing any young Blacks to become teachers either. So we've got to make teaching a profession that's attractive. And we've got to stop telling people that teachers don't make any money. And we've got to raise teacher salaries so that it is a sustaining salary. I mean, you know, kids today, if they say, first thing they ask you when you go to their school is, first question is, how much money you make? You know, they want to know what your salary is. And if there's never any teachers advocating for the teacher profession when I go to schools to talk to them about being a state legislator. And so I start mentioning that too. Do you ever have, in addition to firemen coming in and policemen and legislators, do you have teachers talk about the teacher profession? And that's something more that we have to do as well.
Well, this has been a outstanding conversation. It sounds like somebody has a question, but
yes, Clerk Yarbrough, there's a hand raised, and then there's a question in the question and answer.
I saw that. I think she spoke to. She didn't know what the bill number was. You can find that on the state's website. And then this hand that's raised, I asked that they put the question in the chat, but they didn't. So.
Erin, I can give you some more bill numbers. I just came across them, so I have them in front of me. Okay. So if you're interested, yes, ma'am. If you're interested in the if you're interested in Pillar 1, that was the criminal justice reform piece, violence reduction, police accountability. That is House Bill 3653. House Bill 3653. And my assistant is on. Claire, can you type this into the chat, please, as well, so that they can have it? Okay.
Thank you.
The education, you're welcome. The education and workforce development pillar is House Bill 2170. House Bill 2170. The economic access, opportunity, and equity pillar, pillar 3. Now that pillar was broke into 4 bills, and here's why. We have in Illinois in the legislature what we call a single subject rule. And because the economic pillar dealt with issues in housing, dealt with issues in banking and financing, we support our Black farmers, we were in environmental justice, we were all in all these different spaces. We had to break that down to fit the single subject rule. So here's the 4 bills that make up that pillar. They're all Senate bill numbers. Senate Bill 1980, Senate Bill 1480, Senate Bill 1608, and Senate Bill 1792. 1792. Now, those are the 4 bills that make up the economic pillar. And then the last pillar was House Bill 3840. Now, that's the healthcare pillar. I would encourage you to go there to look at it, but know that that pillar did not pass both. A version passed each chamber, but the House was selecting a new speaker. They didn't have time to concur with the Senate version that went over to the House. We simply ran out of time before the new General Assembly started. But that is the exact language that you will see in this new session. But you can look up House Bill 3840. Now, these were all from the previous GA, so you're looking in the 101st GA, not the 102nd. We just started the 102nd on January 13th. So these were all a part of the previous GA. So it's important that you look up the 101st GA.
Senator Lyford, let me thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out. You're probably on vacation. I see the sun behind you. I wish it was here, but enjoy your vacation, or if you're getting some time away. But thank you so much for spending this time with us. This is important, groundbreaking information that you have shared with us. And for all of, we've got a number of my employees who are on this call. I'm going to reach out to them, and we're going to, you know what, we're not going to just email the governor. We're going to call him up and tell him, we want this legislation passed. We can do that. Now, that's what we can do. So thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. And more than that, I appreciate the work that you've done over the period of time. You have been tenacious. You have focused, and you've gotten some really significant bills passed to make life better for the people of the state of Illinois. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Clerk Yarbrough. You're amazing as well. I'll just sum you up as amazing. I enjoy working with you in public service, and I appreciate your having me as a part of your Black History Month. So everyone, please extend yourself. Learn some more about Black history. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. President, that concludes our program.